Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me share a quote with you. The great Les Brown once said, "You can't see the picture when you're in the frame." If you felt stuck in your fitness, mindset, or life as a whole, head down to the link in the show notes and reach out to learn more about Project Endure Coaching so that we can help you step outside of the frame and bridge the gap between who you are now and who you want to be. We can't wait to hear from you. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 168. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and in Atlanta, Georgia, we have a very, very, very special guest, Ravi Patel. Ravi, how are you, man?
I'm good, man. Joe, thanks for having me.
Of course, this is long overdue for a couple reasons, but
Yeah.
I'll go back and give a little bit of context before I let you introduce yourself. We were first introduced to each other through the Level Up initiative, which was started by Zach Gabor, who's been on the podcast, episode 27, I believe. And since then, I've had Nick Perugini and Andy Chen on the podcast, episodes 46 and 151, who are both part of our original cohort. And it's been so cool to watch all of us grow in different ways, and in specific as entrepreneurs. And so, I've been wanting to have this conversation for a while. Here we are. With that being said, why don't you introduce yourself to people listening who don't know who you are?
Yeah. Well, first, shout out to Zach. He's really helped bring a whole community together. And man, that was a long time ago for us to get together and do that. And we were on these Zoom calls, still figuring out Zoom, honestly. And it was pre-COVID.
Yep.
And yeah, I remember you and we were on some of the calls, just us two and Zach, just talking about PT. We talked about life, all the things. So it's really cool to come full circle and see where Nick and Andy and yourself, Joe, it's just really cool to see this whole community and what they're doing. But yeah, a little bit about me. So I'm a Indian kid who grew up in Southeast Georgia, loving country music. It's just not one of the things that you would typically hear as a story, if you will. But it is a lot of my story. And growing up in this small town, it was very impactful, right? My parents, they immigrated from India and they started a motel business. So I grew up in a motel for the first 18 years of my life. So the motel was attached to our home. So working in the motel, seeing my parents work really hard. So it was just a very unique experience. And I didn't start to realize that until people were like, where are you from? Where did you live and all this stuff? And they were like, you lived in a motel? And so anyways, I'm so blessed for that story. But, you fast forward from there. I went to undergrad at the University of Georgia, did exercise science there, got my DPT at Georgia State University. And now I'm based in Atlanta. I have my own company that is focused on ACL injuries. And I have a beautiful wife. Her name is Abigail, and a 5.5-month-old. His name is Asher. And he's a little stinker. He's the best thing ever. And it's just been fun. This parenthood experience, like this new kind of journey we've been on, has been hard for sure, but it's been very fun. So it's the general gist of my background.
I'm so excited to talk about what parenthood has been like, but we'll kind of rewind and start at the beginning there.
Yeah.
And I think it would be interesting to hear what's the importance in your life of your background in terms of your parents coming from India, that culture, and how it plays a role in like who you are and how you see yourself.
Man, I've had to dissect this a lot, to be honest. And I've always been a very driven person, trying to do the next thing and push really hard. And I always ask myself, where did this come from? And it's this challenging idea really too, because you almost feel as, kids of immigrant parents, you owe them something.
Mm.
And it's hard, right? You almost like feel like, do you measure up to what they've done, like work so hard to do? And so that's something that my brother and I, my older brother and I, we have kind of processed together, talking to other, friends. Andy's a good example, like, immigrant parents. And it's one of those things where, watching them come through this process and build their own business and go through a lot of lows, a lot of highs, but there were a lot of lows in that process. And watching that um, has been very interesting. But the one thing that I always come back to, my dad always tells me this story. And him and his brother, whenever it was not cool, they left India and they went they immigrated over and they started this job. And he was working on a farm, a mushroom farm, and he couldn't speak any English. And so he got fired from that farm. He got fired from multiple other jobs. And most of the time you would, and they had a good life in India, and so why not just go back to India? But he just like persisted. He like learned English. They started learn business, and then they found this business and they started investing in it. And so just watching my parents do that, honestly, the hard things that they did doesn't even compare to anything what I feel is hard. And so that pushes me to make the most of what they have worked so hard to do, is to provide opportunities for me and my brother especially.
Hmm. Does any part of you feel responsible to live up to that same level of work ethic? Because one, that is insane to just think of coming to a brand new country, not speaking the language, figuring it out, dealing with the setbacks and just persisting, and then building this life and this business. Does any part of you feel like you need to live up to that drive and work ethic and building something like they've built?
Yes and no. And this is where I'm still, honestly, it's an ongoing thing that I'm still kind of processing through. And it's more so of, I do feel like I need to make the most of the opportunities I'm given. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I need to live in this space where I owe them, because it's almost like reframing, like they have given me this chance to be able to make the most of my life. And so then therefore it is taking advantage of those situations. So what would be the downside of that is if I didn't take advantage of those situations, really. But it's not trying to owe them anything anymore. It's like, if I can do my best, then I'm fulfilling what it is that I quote unquote owe them.
Mm. Yeah, and I wonder for people listening if there's someone out there or multiple people out there who can relate based on a background or a cultural experience, but also just generalize the concept of expectations of others. I don't know your parents. I don't know if they expect anything of you in specific, but I think a lot of us worry or think or live our lives based off of what we think other people want for us, and
Yeah.
that's a hard space to navigate. And so as we continue down this conversation, I'm sure we can weave that back in. But for now, I would love to zoom out and ask kind of just a big picture question, and we'll see where it leads us. When you look back at your life so far, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not choose for yourself?
Oh man. It's a recent experience actually. And I've dealt with a lot of hard things through my life. And I'd probably say one of the hardest ones, because this is more fresh. So, my son, without getting into the details, he was 8 weeks old. And, there's these, vaccines that come up and whatnot. And so, he went through his routine vaccines and he had a reaction. And now, before anyone gets crazy on anti vaxxers and all that stuff, it's like, it was just a reaction. We don't know exactly what happened. But, anyways, the docs were like, we haven't seen this ever. Like, this one practitioner was like, I've been practicing for 20 years, the pediatrician. She was like, I've never seen this before. And so it wasn't like he was, in a lot of pain or anything, but he was just having this like skin reaction. And so, anyways, we thought something really small turned into something really big. So they were like, hey, you need to go to our children's hospital here in Atlanta, like immediately. And so we went through this whole process, and it was interesting, like to take an 8 week old and us unfamiliar with this, and there's this different connection, and people talk about this of your loved one going through something, but especially your kid, man, it's just like it hits a whole nother level because you love this thing more than any type of love you've ever experienced. And so, and I know everyone listening, like even if you don't have kids, there's like a loved one or someone close to you where you feel this and you've experienced something like this. But watching him go through this, and so he had to get IVs, and so trying to, and the veins kept blowing. So he was just, we had to hold him down, and we had to like literally, like he was crying, he was upset, like we couldn't, Abigail couldn't feed him. So there was just a lot of things that were going on that was just like honestly like a little traumatizing for us, and so it was really hard. And so through that whole process, for us, we lean on our faith. And so that's what's really important. So we're like, all right, like let's lean into our faith. Let's like, you know, get all of our prayer warriors together. Like it's really important for us to just like make sure we know like we're grounded in this and we can make it through. And so we kept telling ourselves we can do hard things. And that's what I would tell him. I told Abigail, I was like, we can do hard things. I'm like, we're Patels, like we're built for this, like we can do it. And so we got through it, and luckily like he was in the clear. He was acting like himself within like a few 5-6 hours or so, but we had to stay overnight. But honestly, it's just one of those things where it starts to make you, it sucks that like situations like this make you have to get to a point to start to recognize the what's important in life. But sometimes these things do need to happen for you to be able to take a step back and zoom out and be like, all right, what is it that we really care about? And you know what? Like going along these lines, there have been a couple other situations around death or around near death experiences where you start to be like, what are we doing? Right. And so then it's just those hard things, honestly, have really helped me personally and helped to shape me and my wife's perspective of things and just embracing the now, being where our feet are.
And first of all, I'm so sorry that you guys had to go through that, and I'm so glad that Asher's okay.
Yeah.
Um, I am not a parent, at least to a human. I always used to laugh when people said they were like parents when they had a dog, and I'm not. I'm not saying that I'm a parent. I definitely don't fall into that camp, but it feels like it at times.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine what it's like to have this human that is part you, part Abigail.
Yeah.
And I've heard people say it's almost like your heart is outside of your body when you have a kid.
Seriously.
Um, and I cannot imagine what that was like. I love a couple things that, you said, we're built for this, we're Patels, we're built for this. I love that phrase. I love the idea of leaning on your faith. That's something that you and I share in common, and
Yeah.
a fair amount of listeners do as well. And then also just that idea of, I guess, feeling helpless is maybe where I'd like to dive into this, because that helpless feeling is really humbling, almost maybe crushing. There are probably
Yeah.
a lot of other words you could use, but take me through that, right? When you were feeling helpless, what was that experience like?
It's challenging, man, especially for someone who wants to be problem solution oriented. That's my brain 100%. And even when Abigail and I are talking through things, my brain automatically goes, here's a problem,
Mm,
here's a solution, right? Let's fix the problem. But when you're in those situations, it's it's hard. And so when you're feeling helpless, number one thing is coming back, especially in situations like that, as I had mentioned, like to my faith. But then also, I start to try and focus on like what are our controllables? What can we really focus on?
mm,
Because focusing on uncontrollables or things that are out of our control, I feel like it just kind of perpetuates that helpless feeling and out of control. Versus if we can focus on the things that we can control, like, okay, like this situation sucks, but how can we make the most of it? Okay, like he's doing okay. Like there's nothing, going down or going bad here. Um, so it's being able to work on those things and wrap our mindset around that versus the things that we can't control.
mm. So I'll dive into a topic here that I don't believe, and at least in my recollection, that I've talked about on the podcast before. But when it comes to faith, there's this idea of contentment, and our church is doing a series on this, so it's very fresh in my mind. But contentment is a skill. At least
Mhm.
that's the way I'm seeing it now, and the ability to be content inside, have inner peace despite what's going on outside is a really hard skill to build. And the verses, I'll read these three. It's Philippians 4, 11 through 13. I have it pulled up here. So I'll read this. And it says, "Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me, and him is Christ." And so just that idea of like, at the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, and in the chaos of life, how do you find and tap into that inner peace? And of course, it's so much easier to say that than to do that. But it sounds like circumstances like that, right, where you're brought low, are incredible opportunities to practice that skill, if you will, of contentment.
Yeah. Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is just really getting into prayer, and I think that that helps to just get connected to God. And I think um just knowing that in these situations, if you have that foundation built,
Mhm.
then it's very helpful to lean on that foundation, right? And so finding contentment, it's almost like weathering the storm, right? And God doesn't say like he's going to make life easy. He's just like, I'm going to be there whenever things get hard. And Abigail and I have talked about this actually a lot recently, and how we're going to communicate with Asher, and what happens when these bad things happen, or like, how does your faith play into this? And it's not supposed to be this promise of it's easy. It's that he's going to be there with you to help you get through it. And it's something that I feel strongly, especially through these situations, and it's something that I hope to lean into as we move forward as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Now, to come back out of this story and shift to a different part of your life that I would love to talk more about, I want to hear about what got you into the business world in general. I'm imagining that watching your parents build a business played into that a bit, but specifically the ACL side of things. And
Yeah.
so I'm going to ask a different question. If this is not your answer, then give me your true answer and we'll come back to the ACL side. So, when you look at your life so far, what's the hardest thing that you've done on purpose, and why have you done that thing? And again, if it's not, rehabbing from an injury or building a business, that's okay. We'll come back to those things.
The number one thing that I've chosen for myself is building a business. The ACL recovery was in and of itself in that season of life hard, but when I reflect on things, building a business has probably been the most challenging and hardest thing I've chosen to do.
I can't wait to talk about this because it's so therapeutic for me to talk to someone else who gets it.
Right, me too.
So before we talk about the business itself and the challenges that come with it, tell me a little bit about the ACL story for you, and what happened, what the rehab was like, and how that led to this business specifically.
Yeah, so I've experienced two ACL injuries. My first one was in high school. I was a sophomore playing football. And so that was a very interesting process. I did the surgery, I rehabbed from it, came back and played my senior year. And then, that's where my interest really peaked for movement and physical therapy. I had always been interested in it, playing sports, but the injury really helped me out. And I had always thought about going to med school and becoming a physician and doing orthopedic surgery or something like that. But then, I started hanging out with different docs, and I was like, this is cool, but I was like, man, I really connected with my PT when I was in high school. I was like, they do cool stuff. Like I got to know them personally, who they are. They got to know me. So there's just something about that that really made a connection. And so then I got into undergrad, and in my senior year of undergrad, I tore my ACL again. So on the other side. And so that was a interesting experience because it was very different than my first one, and more so of just the state of life I was in. And so, I was kind of getting ready to potentially go to school for PT school, but I ended up taking a year doing a strength and conditioning internship, which is amazing. But with that said, it was just like an opportunity, or what I kind of use is like an open door. There's certain doors that close and certain doors that open. And it was one of those where I was like, man, maybe this is happened for a reason. And so the one challenge that was with that second one was that, again, coming back to being a kid from an immigrant parents, like there's certain things that they don't necessarily understand a whole lot, and one of that is the healthcare system. Honestly, no one really understands it, but especially someone who moves here from somewhere else. So I didn't want to burden them with the whole surgery and everything, so they didn't even know I tore my ACL or anything. And my brother and I, which we kind of had done through our whole lives, is trying to figure stuff out on our own. And so um, I had a 10K, $10,000 out of pocket max as a student to get my surgery. And so, we were debating, and I was like, I kind of need my ACL because my knee wasn't functioning correctly. And so, my brother was like, I've got this $3,000 limit on my credit card. And so we put $2,300 down on the credit card and booked the surgery. And as a college student, I took on $10,000 of debt for my surgery. But it's all this thing that was like a learning experience. Now, would I have been better not having that debt? Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's part of my story. And it helps me to understand what people go through and experience. And these ACL injuries not only taught me like physical resilience, but a lot of mental resilience, because you get your life taken away from you, especially physically moving and being a part of stuff, for anywhere from 9 months to a year or more than that, really, because it takes that long to get back from one of these injuries. And so that was huge for me, and I always had this passion with it. And in PT school, I did ACL research. I just kind of always knew I was going to go down this path, and it was just a big gap in care, in terms of working with these athletes and getting them back to sport because of the process and the system that's built around it. So that's where it kind of fast forwarded to, right before COVID. It was February of 2020. I left my job and made the jump and started the business, all focused around ACL injuries.
What was it like to start a business, about a month before the world shut down?
It was a blessing in disguise. In the moment, I was like, this is not what I was planning. And so just like the whole world had to pivot, like I had to pivot as well. But the beauty is that I actually wanted to build something that had a remote component to it. And, a lot of physical therapy is around in person for the most part, but it's getting more and more worldwide of like, remote businesses and what we can do with technology. But at the time, it wasn't so common then, but it was something that I had learned as a skill set. So I wanted to build into the business. And so honestly, it was a best blessing in disguise because I was like ready to go. I was like, yes, like I love remote programming. This is what I do. Like this is what I've learned. And I want to connect this with ACLs and help people not only locally, but all around the world. So there was definitely a lot of adjustments and a lot of things just like anyone had to do during COVID, but it was a blessing in disguise. That's what I I say about COVID coming in 1 month after I started the business.
Mm. I love the phrase, make adjustments, not excuses. And I think the ability to adjust and pivot and adapt is pivotal to running a business and being an entrepreneur. And so, all right, first challenge, first hurdle, it actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
Yeah,
Let's just talk about some of the other challenges that come along with running a business.
yeah.
Whatever's top of mind, I'll let you spit it out and then we'll talk about those things for a while.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the number one thing that I find challenging for myself is that managing time, because with a normal job, you have just like the normal constraints of like they kind of almost create your time for you, right? The meetings or just like this is what the expectations are. But as a business owner and entrepreneur, you kind of create your own time, right? So it's challenging because you almost want to be like, well, I have all this time. So then therefore I need to make the most of all this time, especially pre-kid and pre even being married, right? Like even then you're like grinding really hard. But then all these other priorities start to come into the fold. And so then therefore it's you can't work as much as you did. And the other thing that I've learned with this is that just because you have time available doesn't mean that you're just going to make more progress. You're probably just going to fall to Parkinson's law and just like fill up the time you have available to do the same task. Even if if you're given 8 hours versus 2 hours, you'll probably do the exact same work and you'll just get it done and it's good enough, right? So time management has probably been one of the biggest things, and getting into, you know, other priorities coming into the fold as I've grown the business and gotten older, gotten married, had a kid.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to managing your time, and running your business, pre-marriage, pre-kid, what did that look like for you? Was it the, classic, like, wake up and work and then work until you go to sleep kinda thing?
Yeah. I honestly didn't know what I did when I reflect back. I'm like, what did I do then? I like woke up and just worked. And yeah, it was messy. And the thing that has been also challenging for me personally is um trying to when you're trying to make a sprint, especially to push a business, there are things that can fall by the wayside, like whether it is like health or sleep, nutrition, all these different things, movement. So there's been different seasons through that, and I know especially when I first started, I did not do the best because I was like, I got all this time, but then as the day goes on, you get tired and you're like, do I really want to do this? And so it's been adjustments over the period of time for me to find and prioritize and make the most of my day, but then also not knowing like I have this entire day from 5 6 a.m. all the way until midnight, because we just can't do it that way anymore.
Mhm. So I know for a fact I'm not perfect. I don't think anyone is. And so the next question I'm going to ask, we'll just assume that your answer is the ideal, and maybe sometimes you fall short. But now that you have, a wife and a child and other priorities, how do you manage your time in this season of life, knowing that, business, while it is important, going back to what we talked about earlier, it's not the most important thing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
People and relationships matter more. So,
Right.
how do you manage your time these days? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, number one is having an amazing partner. Um, Abigail is a saint. She has dealt with the crazy hours and just all the things that even just like having a kid and getting into this new season of life. But all of the business prior to, one mentality was trying to get it to a certain place where I don't feel like I need to work in the business constantly all the time, right? And there is, no matter what, like, and anyone who has their own business like knows this, like you do have a certain period, especially initially, where you are grinding. You're grinding. And it's not anything to be prideful of. It's just more so of like it just was has to be done to have a successful business. And it's one of those things where you do need to kind of put in the front end work and do that hard stuff early, so then that way you can basically build your business around your life, right? And that's one of the things that my mentors have taught me is like a lot of times like work and business is the priority and then life happens around it. For me, since starting the business, my main thing in life design has been build my business around the lifestyle that I want and just kind of break whatever is the status quo or the norm of like what should be work. Now you still have to push and work hard for something that you really care about. So it's this tug of war between like really working on that. But as I had mentioned, like priorities change, especially as seasons shift. And I got married, and then continuing to build the business during that season, but also being present for my wife, and also making time for friends and family. And then of course having our son Asher, it's setting ourselves up for success during those seasons. And Abigail has been amazing to help just be a good teammate in that, but then also just knowing that this has been the goal is having our son and being able to spend time with him. So now, like, the structure of the business and when I start work and the breaks that I take in the day, what I come back to is like the impact per minute. So
Mm.
instead of it being this, I'm going to work 8 to 10 hours or 12 hours today, it's like, how can I make my impact per minute go up? So even if I work 4 hours today, how can I make that go up? Because then, therefore, when people probably look at it for the most part, we could probably work a little less if we just put more into every single minute.
Ooh, I like that a lot. Impact per minute. I want to go back to the idea of shifting your strategies in different seasons. There's this quote that I love. It's from Ursula Le Guin, and I don't know who she is or where this came from, but I love the quote. So she said, "What goes too long unchanged destroys itself. The forest is forever because it dies and dies and dies, and so it lives." And it's almost like, let's take this. Okay, let's take this to the world of rehab and physical medicine, right? Our bones are constantly, breaking themselves down and building themselves back up. And that's how they survive, right? That's how the forest survives. That's how we survive as people. We have to let go of the strategies and things that no longer serve us in this season. And I think that that change can be really, really hard because as a business owner, when you let go of some of those things, it can feel like you're letting go of control, and letting go of control when you have ownership over this thing can feel really, really hard. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, it has been hard, and that would probably be another challenge I would say coming into your own business with just building this is that you have to be comfortable delegating, for example, and allowing other people to do stuff. And it's still difficult, to be honest, because it's your baby, like you really care about it. But that's where it's also important to bring on people who are in alignment with the same mission. And who have great work ethic, and they're just good humans. And so part of that is like bringing on the right people, but then also trusting your gut with those people and then what you have built and the systems around it and everything, to be able to allow it to flourish. And I often find that I'm the bottleneck in business. I'm the bottleneck. So then I have to get out of my own way. Because if I let these people do their thing, then the business will truly flourish,
Mm.
right? And that's the goal, is to hire people smarter than myself and people who are going to move the mission forward. And so that has been a very interesting learning experience for myself because you're so protective of it. But it's just making sure that we put the right people in place, delegate, and allow these people to flourish, because it allows me to get them out of my own way as well, to allow this thing to grow and do its thing.
Now, this could be a stretch of all stretches, but if you viewed having a child, to Asher, the same as you viewed your business, if you didn't delegate and you held on to complete control, that would almost be like, as Asher grows up, you're homeschooling him, you're spoon feeding him, you're not letting him do anything outside of your sight or control. And that would just, we could all just say that would not work out well. Right.
No, not at all. And that would be exhausting on both ends, honestly. It's exhausting for the parents or the person who is kind of controlling that process. And it's all also exhausting for Asher, for example. He might not know any different, but at the end of the day, he will experience different later. But with that said, it just like limits the opportunities and just controls a lot of things. And I think part of this process is allowing people to just explore and do that and make mistakes, honestly, even within the business. And Asher's going to make mistakes and it's going to be hard. But through those mistakes is where they'll actually grow and become better humans. And especially from the business side, like that stuff happens, but it's like, okay, cool. Like let's reframe this into a learning moment and what we can do moving forward, in order to just improve the business, right?
Yeah, of course. Now, one topic that always comes up in my mind when I think of entrepreneurship is just the emotional volatility that can happen, right? Just the ups and the downs, and going through those tough times and even going through the great times and managing that roller coaster of emotions. Have you experienced a lot of emotional volatility through the life of your business to this point?
Yes. It's and It's easy because also a lot of what I do, for example, social media has a big component to it. And especially with a lot of businesses, um, social media can be a big part of marketing, right? And so then therefore it impacts the people coming in the door and growing the business. So with that comes the ability to compare yourself. And it's one of the things that humans by nature um, struggle with. I know I've struggled with it. And it's one of those things that before I'd be like, oh, well, this person's doing that. And it's easy to get in these mindset and places where the comparison trap, right? And it's the classic quote of comparison is a thief of joy. And I started to learn that a lot early on. And I started to recognize, wow, this is really stealing from me.
Mm.
And so this is something that I've had to like kind of work through. And it's just one of those things that um, running your own race with this kind of situation and just knowing like, all right, I'm trying to just beat myself and really try to push the mission forward is just really important with this process and with business especially, um, just to make sure it continues to grow and you don't kind of come back to this place of comparison and more so just like running your own race.
Mm. So I'm reading this book. It's called The Courage to Be Disliked. And I'll read a quote from it and then explain why this came to mind. But the quote is from Ichiro Kishimi. And he said, "Your unhappiness cannot be blamed on your past or your environment. And it isn't that you lack competence, you just lack courage. One might say you are lacking in the courage to be happy." And I think it takes a lot of courage to choose to say, hey, this is my life. This is my race. This is my book. I'm living it. I'm running it. I'm writing it. And it doesn't matter what these other people are doing to the left and right of me because we're all doing our own things. And there's no use in comparing to that. And I think when it comes to comparison, social media can be a really tough place for a lot of people. I also think that social media can be a beautiful place
Yes.
because it allows for connections like this. It allows for businesses like ours, and it allows for so many other positives. But when it comes to your relationship with social media, I would love to hear what that looks like, and when it's at its healthiest, what does that
Mhm.
look like? Because I know everyone listening could benefit from talking and listening to this.
Yeah, and I did want to touch on one thing that had
Mhm.
left me prior to was that the thing about the emotional volatility, like the thing that has helped me steady myself the most is don't get too high on the highs and don't get too low on the lows.
Mhm.
It's one thing that I've learned over the period of time because there are high moments and those will be fleeting, so will the low moments. And so it's just kind of staying in the middle, right? And that's super helpful for me as a young entrepreneur and still super young. But with that said, like early in business versus like where I am now, almost 4 or 5 years later, like being able to go through that and find a little bit more of that middle zone versus like the peaks and valleys of it.
Yeah.
But to go to your question of social media and the relationship, this has also shifted over time. Like, yeah, before it was comparison, but I've worked through a lot of that, to be honest, and to run my own race and knowing I have my own authentic voice and being able to share what my story is, and it's my story. It's no one else's story, and that's what's so beautiful about everybody's story. And so, therefore, being able to share that and share what it is that you care so much about, and being able to just use social media as just like those relationships and connections, right? To be able to do good. Of course, it's got the double edged sword of it, but with that said, like yeah, there is so many positives to it, and being able to connect from people all over the world and being able to help them, whether it's ACL or whether it's like mindset pieces, right? And so that has been something that has been cultivated over time for sure. And it's not like, oh, I don't still fall into these traps. I think everyone does, right? But it's being able to come out of that really quick and kind of zoom out and be like, all right, what am I using this for? And if we kind of like shift our perspective a little bit more of like, this is just a tool for us to be able to connect to humans and to be able to really push the mission forward of what it is that we're here to do.
Yeah, I love that perspective shift. And I think that's very applicable to anyone and everyone who's listening to this. And so, before I move on to the next question that I always ask, I would love to hear when it comes to the mindset of someone who just had, an ACL injury or an ACL surgery, and they're coming out of that. What's one thing that you find most people are really stuck on or worried about or fearful with that you've been able to help people overcome?
The timeline.
Mm,
Everyone has this like expected timeline, you know? And I understand that we anchor ourselves to time. That's just what naturally we are built to do, right? Our schedules and the calendar and everything. And so this process itself is built on sure time. And so, you're depending on what narratives or voices that you're getting into your kind of ecosystem, if you will. Some people are told it's a 3 month process, 6 month process. The 9 to 12 month is becoming a little bit more common, luckily, but we still hear the 6 month, right? And there's these protocols, as I know you're familiar with too, in our space, where it's just like you kind of fit every single human into this one sheet of paper, and you're just like, this is exactly how your rehab should go. At 12 weeks you do this, at 20 weeks you do this, you return to sport at 6 months or 9 months, and then you're good to go, right? And so the thing is that we don't take into account the human variance or the n=1 situation, right? Like, it's important to take what the average happens, and sure, like we still give timelines and expectations, but with that said, we adapt as we go, and helping our athletes get through basically comparison's a big one, but especially the timeline and expectations versus reality. Because I give the example is like, if you go and work a job and they told you that you're going to get, $50 for it, and you only get 10 bucks for it, like, you're gonna be pretty mad, right? And so in a sense, this is kind of what it is. It's like, you've been told you're going to run at 12 weeks, but I'm sorry, you're at 12 weeks and you still got another 8, 10 weeks left. And for someone who's a runner, that sucks, man. Like, that's their community potentially, their outlet, the stress relief, the way that they keep their body healthy, their mindset, right? So there's a lot of factors that play into how an injury affects a human being, right? And so one of the biggest things that we're always trying to do is help shift this timeline and giving very healthy expectations based on our experience and what we know. And that's one of the things I think, as like rehab providers, we can do really well if we communicate that really well to our athletes, is knowing like, hey, there's going to be ebbs and flows. You're probably going to hit a setback, and this process isn't going to be perfect. It's not linear. So they can start to like reframe these things. So then when something like that does happen, they're just like, okay, like I knew about this. I knew it was going to happen, versus this perfect linear, like I'm getting back in 9 months process.
yeah, I love that. And again, it's something that I think most of us as humans understand. And yet, when things don't go according to plan, it's easy to get flustered or frustrated or thrown off course. But that's life, right? Like we could have a timeline for, I'll have X amount of dollars when, and then the stock market tanks, or
Right.
I'll be married when, and then it takes longer than you think, or I'll have kids when, and then you have trouble with it, right? All these things in life, like nothing's on a solid timeline. It's all up in the air. And I think if we could remind ourselves of that and keep our expectations at a place where we know it's going to be bumpy, we know there are going to be twists and turns, maybe then it becomes a bit easier to handle them when they come. So
Mhm.
I appreciate you sharing that. And on that note, this is the Project Endure podcast. And I like to ask guests, when you hear the word endurance, what does that mean to you, Ravi?
The ability to persist, right? The ability to keep going. I kind of like this concept of never zero. And so basically, it just means never get to zero. Don't let your momentum get to zero. And even if it's just showing up, that's like not zero, right? And it could be just the slightest little bit, and that's continuing to endure, to continuing to persist, showing up. And so that's one of the biggest things that I've even learned with different areas of my life, is just never let your momentum hit zero, because then therefore you're moving in the positive direction.
Mm. So You know, when you learn to ride a bike, and actually, you know what? I shouldn't assume because I said this in a conversation recently, and this grown adult was like, I don't know how to ride a bike.
Oh man,
Yeah. But for most people who know how to ride a bike, it's that
majority.
idea of when you're learning, going from dead stop to start is really, 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 really hard.
Yeah,
But once you're going, as long as you don't let the bike stop, you have a better chance of continuing to pedal and move and push. And so I love that idea of not letting momentum go to zero, and just showing up is a great way to do that. And an awesome reminder. Um,
yeah.
so, with that being said, as we land this conversation, the last and my favorite question of the podcast, to be honest, is aimed at people who are going through a tough time. Maybe it's an injury, a setback, a challenge of sorts, but there are people all over the world listening to this who are going through a tough season, a dark time. If you got a chance to just say whatever it was that you wanted to those people to encourage them or guide them, what would you share to someone going through a tough time?
You can do hard things. Like the human body is so resilient, the human mind is so resilient, and I just know that we're built to do hard things, right? And a lot of this is just being able to face these things head on. And the other thing that comes to mind is just focus on laying your next brick. So I
Mm,
love kind of like this brick by brick, like building a brick wall or building this foundation. We talk to all our athletes about this. This is a part of like our kind of mindset work that we do, but we just talk about this brick by brick approach, right? And when you think about this tall task, or let's say even 9 months ahead of you, or whatever it is that you have a goal set that you're facing, it's like, yeah, you want to do that, but it can get overwhelming and it feels like a very tall task. But if we kind of take this brick by brick mentality, if we just focus on laying that next brick, then over time, like brick by brick by brick, like you're eventually going to have this brick wall built, or you're going to have this like foundation built. And so that makes it very achievable, but then it also allows you to just like be laser focused on this one thing. And then if we just like focus on that and the next one and the next one, then we'll ultimately be at the thing that we're hoping to achieve.
mm. That's so well said. And, you know, I love the visual of that, just stacking bricks. And it reminds me a lot of this quote from John Wellborn. And I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but he says something to the effect of life and training are a lot like moving a big pile of dirt. Some
Mm,
days you have a shovel and some days you have a spoon, but as long as you're moving dirt, that's all that matters.
yeah.
And it's, yeah, if it's a brick, you know, a day, a brick a week, a brick a month, as
Right.
long as you don't let the momentum go to zero, you're still building in the right direction. And I love that.
100%. I love the spoon versus shovel. It's like, yeah, just keep it going step by step, even if it's just a little. Like it matters so much, and it makes me think also of. I love James Clear work, Atomic Habits, brilliant guy, but he talks about the ice cube analogy, right? Like it's the melting point, and you're just also like, all right, well, there's an ice cube in front of you on the table, and it's let's say it's 26 degrees Fahrenheit for us, right? And you're just gonna keep going, and you're like putting in this work, and you're laying those bricks, or you're moving that dirt, whether it's the spoon or the shovel. But it's getting to 27, it's getting to 28, 29, 30, 31 degrees. And you're just like, why isn't it melting? Like, why isn't it happening? And then all of a sudden, you move that spoonful, or you lay that next brick, and all of a sudden it's 32 degrees, and you're just like, this thing's melting. Like I'm broken through the point, or I've arrived at whatever like it is that I was hoping to get to. So it just kind of brings me back to those things. It's like staying persistent, that endurance. So yeah, man, I love that quote, and I feel like it does relate a lot to a lot of what we do in life.
Yeah. And so, because we're both in the world of physical therapy, I figured we'd tie in one more concept. And this goes beyond just any kind of rehab, but just to physical strength and fitness in general, right? We take for granted sometimes the fact that we can move our bodies. And, you know, everybody has different abilities and capacities, but if you can move, that's a gift. And in order to stay strong or get stronger, be more resilient, you have to face some sort of resistance, right? Like you have to do more. You have to lift a bit heavier. You have to add a little bit more stress, and the body adapts to that, right? But I think it's really easy to miss that in life, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, the same principle applies, right?
Mhm.
Struggle comes before strength. And when the hard things happen to us, or we choose to do the hard things that tax us, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, we can look at that the same way, because that is how resilience is built, through resistance.
Yeah, I completely agree. And being able to endure those hard things, and even force ourselves to do hard things allows us to be prepared for those inevitable hard things that come in life. And I think that's where training it comes in and helps so much. And even just the business stuff, right? Like there are things that come up, but we're choosing this hard, and being able to work through the adversities that come through that, and whether it's physical, mental, it allows us to be prepared for these situations where we won't have as much control over, or something does hit us really hard, but since we've been focused on it and we've been working on it and trying to do it to the best of our abilities, we are a bit more prepared to make those feel not as heavy or weighted, if you will, with those circumstances.
Yeah. Very well said. And so, Ravi, for people listening to this who, maybe they have an ACL injury, or maybe they know someone who did, or maybe they just want to follow along and learn more about you, where are the best places for people to contact you and just learn more about what you do?
Yeah, the best place is probably Instagram. So my handle's ravipatel.dpt. So yeah, please connect with me. I love meeting new people, connecting with other humans, and yeah, if I can ever be of any help in any way, whether it's ACL or whether it's just honestly anything, I'm happy to help. And I believe it's important to just like continue to like pay things forward, in terms of even like if it's a student. I try to take the time to message people and not just be like, all right, like this is just another message. Sure, it can like add up, as we all know, but it's important to pay that forward to people, and just continue to reach and help as many humans as we can.
I couldn't agree more. And if you're listening to this, there isn't a better guy to connect with than Ravi. So reach out. And Ravi, thank you for this. Thank you for, our friendship that we've carried on through the years. And thank you for everything that you do. Can't wait to see where life takes you from here. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch.
I appreciate it, Joe. It was great to be on this podcast, and thankful for all the work that you do and all the humans that you help, and your team helps. So I'm honored to be on this podcast. So thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.